The Cost of the Crown. A Mother's Vengeance Forged in Fire. Stop scrolling, like this video, and subscribe for more stories packed with drama and betrayal. And don't forget to comment on what you would do in our protagonist's shoes. When a seemingly perfect life shatters into 3 words, a man stands before the woman he built his empire with and tears her world apart. I'm leaving you. Arabella Vance, 28, felt the crystal wine glass slip from her fingers, exploding on the marble floor. A perfect, violent metaphor for her heart. She was 7 months pregnant, carrying the heir to the Thorn fortune, a fortune her own family had helped build. But her husband, Nathaniel, had found a new, richer partner. He didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to erase her and her child. Cast out onto the streets, penniless, she found an unlikely ally in the only man Nathaniel feared. His ruthless rival, Gideon Stone. This isn't just a story of betrayal. This is the story of how a mother's love, forged in the fire of ruin, and the promise of an enemy born from a forgotten debt, built a fortress around a child that the city's most powerful man would try and fail to tear down. Part 1. The 3-word bullet. Setting: Manhattan. Charity Gala, 2025. The crystal chandeliers at the Metamorphosis Charity Gala dripped light like liquid diamonds, casting a golden glow over Manhattan's elite. Arabella Vance, her hand resting protectively on the gentle curve of her 7-month pregnant belly, watched her husband, Nathaniel Thorn, glide through the ballroom. He moved with the grace of a predator. His smile was a carefully calibrated weapon that disarmed competitors and charmed investors. He was beautiful, achingly so, and for the last 5 years, he had been hers. Their life was a masterpiece of perfection. The sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, weekends in the Hamptons, closets filled with bespoke suits and haute couture. It was all part of the Thorn brand, built on Nathaniel's sharp intellect and the solid financial foundation of Arabella's old money family. The Vances. Her father had seen Nathaniel's ambition as a perfect match for the family legacy. He'd mentored the boy from the wrong side of the tracks, giving him the seed capital to start and consolidating their legacy with his most prized treasure, his daughter. "Your glowing treasure," a voice beside her purred. It was Beatrice Sterling, a socialite whose face was as tight as her social circle. Arabella offered a polite smile. "It's the pregnancy glow, Beatrice, or so they tell me." "Well, it suits you better than most. Nathaniel must be thrilled. A son to carry on the name." "He is," Arabella said, her gaze finding him across the ballroom again. He was in an animated conversation with the infamous telecom magnate, Mr. Sterling. Standing next to Sterling was his daughter, Serafina, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice and diamonds. She laughed at something Nathaniel said, her head tilted, a scarlet mouth against pale skin. A familiar stab of unease tightened Arabella's chest. It was the late nights at the office, the whispered phone calls he abruptly ended when she entered the room, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his suit jacket. He always had a plausible explanation. A deal was closing. A crisis was averted. You know how it is, Arabella. To stay on top, you can never rest. And she, wanting to be the supportive wife, the perfect partner, had accepted it. She'd pushed her doubts into the dark corners of her mind, focusing instead on the nursery being painted in soft blues and creams, on the little life fluttering inside her. Her eyes swept the room and landed on a figure standing alone near the terrace doors. Gideon Stone. The only man in New York who could make Nathaniel flinch. Stone was new money, a ghost who had emerged from the shadows of Silicon Valley 5 years ago and had been systematically dismantling his competitors ever since. His rivalry with Nathaniel was legendary. Where Nathaniel was polished charm, Gideon was brutal efficiency. He didn't network. He conquered. He looked different from his photos in Forbes. Taller, darker. An intensity radiated from him that seemed to suck the air from his immediate vicinity. He wasn't smiling or socializing. He was simply observing. His gaze was an analytical spotlight, scanning everything. For one terrifying second, his eyes met hers across the crowded room. There was no warmth in them, just a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. Recognition? Or was it pity? She shivered and looked away, feeling as though he had seen past her carefully constructed happiness to the anxious heart beating underneath. Nathaniel finally broke free of the Sterlings and returned to her side, his hand landing on her lower back. "Enjoying the party, my love?" "It's a lovely event," she said, trying to keep her tone light. "You and Serafina Sterling seem to have a lot to discuss." A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before being replaced by his signature smile. "Sterling is a necessary evil, and Serafina is his gatekeeper. It's just business, Arabella. Always business." He leaned in and kissed her cheek, but his eyes were already scanning the crowd for his next target. The kiss felt cold, a performance for the audience they were always playing to. Interaction break. Arabella is 7 months pregnant and full of doubt. Should she confront Nathaniel about the late nights and Serafina now, or wait until after the baby is born? Comment your advice below. Part 2. The Shattered Golden Cage. Later that night, as their luxury car sped through the gleaming streets of Manhattan, the silence between them was heavy. Arabella wanted to ask about the late nights, the faint scent of gardenias, but the words wouldn't form. To ask was to be prepared for an answer she wasn't sure she could survive. Back in their penthouse, the silence stretched, amplified by the cavernous rooms and the panoramic view of the city that never slept. Nathaniel loosened his tie, his back to her, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The Sterling deal is going to be massive, Arabella," he said, his voice distant. "It's the final piece. It will make us untouchable." The word "us" sounded alien, a relic from a time when she believed it meant the two of them. Now, it felt like it meant him and his ambition. "That's wonderful, Nate," she replied softly. He didn't turn around. "I need you to understand what's at stake, the level of commitment that's going to be required." "I do understand," she whispered, hand on her belly. "We both understand." For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the hum of the city below. When he finally turned around, his face was a mask she didn't recognize. The charming husband was gone, replaced by the ruthless CEO. There was no love in his eyes, only a chilling, final calculation. The golden cage she had called home was about to become her tomb. The following week passed in a blur of forced normality. Nathaniel was more distant than ever, a phantom in their opulent home. He moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose that unnerved Arabella. He was orchestrating something, she knew, but she clung to the hope that it was just the Sterling deal. The fragile illusion shattered on a Tuesday afternoon, the sky the color of a dull bruise that threatened rain. Arabella was in the nursery, carefully folding a small cashmere sweater when Nathaniel walked in. He made no comment about the room, the hand-painted mural, or the small mountain of baby gifts. He simply stood in the doorway. "We need to talk," he said. His tone was flat, devoid of emotion. The voice he used in board meetings right before dismantling a failing department. A cold dread washed over her. "All right," she said, pausing her hand over the sweater. "Is something wrong with the deal?" "The deal is fine. The deal is perfect." He walked further into the room, his expensive leather shoes silent on the plush carpet. He stopped by the crib, running a hand over the smooth, polished wood. All of this, is a complication." "A complication?" Arabella's voice was a weak whisper. "Nate, this is our son's room. Our baby." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were as gray and cold as the storm gathering outside. I'm leaving you, Arabella. The words didn't register at first. She stared at him, waiting for the punchline. But his expression remained unchanged, a mask of grim finality. What? I'm leaving you, he repeated, clipping each word with brutal precision. I've filed for divorce. My attorney will be in touch with yours. Arabella felt the strength drain from her legs, and she grabbed the changing table for support. The room began to spin. Why? Who is it? Serafina Sterling. The name tasted like poison on her tongue. He had the decency to look away. Serafina and I are getting married. Her father has named me a full partner at Sterling Telecom. This merger isn't just a business deal, Arabella. It's a dynasty. The blatant audacity, the cold, transactional nature of his betrayal stole her breath. He was trading her in, trading his family for a better business deal. A dynasty? What about our family? What about your son? Her voice cracked. The baby changes things, he said, turning back to her, his face resolute. Serafina's family is particular. A child from a previous marriage, especially one born so close to our own union, would be an embarrassment. A loose end. A loose end? She shrieked, the sound raw and wounded. He is your son. He is part of you. That's why this needs to be handled cleanly, Nathaniel continued, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial tone, as if discussing a hostile takeover, not his child's fate. I have a proposition. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, more than enough for you to live comfortably, go somewhere new, start over. I don't want your money, Nathaniel. I want my husband. I want a father for my son. You're not listening, he hissed, stepping closer. The mask of civility was gone, revealing the ugliness beneath. The settlement is contingent on one thing. You terminate the pregnancy. The air rushed out of her lungs in a single, ragged gasp. The room tilted violently. He was asking her to kill her son, to erase the last living piece of the love she thought they had shared. All for the sake of his ambition. Get out, she whispered, the words trembling with a rage so deep she felt it could shatter her bones. Arabella, be reasonable. A child will only tie you to a past that's over. This is a clean slate for both of us. You can be free. Get out! She screamed, grabbing a porcelain lamp from the side table and hurling it at him. It smashed against the wall just behind his head, the sound of shattered ceramic echoing the destruction in the room and in her heart. He didn't even flinch. He simply smoothed his tie, his expression hardening into one of utter contempt. I see you're going to be difficult. I had hoped to handle this with dignity. Dignity? You walk into our baby's room and ask me to murder him for your career, and you talk about dignity? Her body shook with sobs, a storm of grief and fury erupting inside her. Fine, he said, his voice like ice. Have it your way, but don't think for a second you'll get anything from me. Our prenuptial agreement is unbreakable, something your own father insisted on. Every asset, every consolidated Thorn stock option is in my name. The company was failing when we married. I'm the one who made it what it is. You will leave this marriage with what you brought into it, the Vance name and not much else. He was cutting her off completely, leaving her stranded. He had used her family's money and connections to build his empire, and now he was casting her aside with nothing. My father trusted you, she choked out. Your father is dead, Nathaniel said with chilling finality. He made a bad investment. I'm correcting it now. He turned and walked out of the nursery, leaving her alone amidst the wreckage of their future. She sank to the floor, her hands wrapped around her belly. The small, innocent life inside her, the only real thing left in a world that had just been stripped of all its truth and beauty. The rain finally broke outside, lashing against the windows, as Arabella Vance sat on the floor of a room built for a son who would now never know his father. And she cried. Interaction break. Nathaniel's cruelty is breathtaking. Do you think Arabella can survive this alone, penniless and about to be evicted? Or will she need an ally? Please like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. The story continues in the next response, focusing on her descent and the unexpected arrival of Gideon Stone. The Cost of the Crown, A Mother's Vengeance Forged in Fire. Part 3. The Fall from Grace. Setting, Brooklyn, New York. Days later. The days that followed Nathaniel's declaration were a masterclass in systematic cruelty. True to his word, Nathaniel Thorne moved with the swift, impersonal efficiency of a corporate raider dismantling a failing company. The first notification was an email from the building management. The corporate lease on the penthouse was terminated, and Arabella had 30 days to vacate. Joint bank accounts were frozen, then emptied. Credit cards were declined. The black luxury car and her driver vanished. Her world, once a limitless horizon of privilege, shrunk to the size of a few cardboard boxes. The society friends who had toasted her at her baby shower now averted their eyes in the few places she still frequented. Their whispers followed her like a cold wind. She was no longer Arabella Vance Thorne, the elegant wife of a titan. She was a scandal, a cautionary tale, a woman scorned, and worst of all, a woman left penniless. In her world, poverty was the one unforgivable sin. She packed the nursery herself, each tiny outfit and soft blanket a new stab of pain. She was a ghost, haunting the shell of her own life, surrounded by objects that no longer belonged to her. The city she had once considered her kingdom now felt alien and hostile. Every skyscraper seemed to mock her, a monument to the power and wealth that had been stolen. Her attorney, a kind but weary man named Mr. Tar Thompson, who had served her family for 40 years, laid out the harsh reality. The prenuptial agreement is a fortress, Arabella. Your father helped draft it to protect the family assets should the marriage fail. The irony is, Nathaniel has twisted it. He's successfully argued that because he absorbed Vance Industries into Thorne Consolidated, and then grew the company exponentially, all assets are now considered his creation. So I get nothing? She asked. Her voice hollow. He is legally required to provide child support once the baby is born, Mr. Thompson conceded, a tiny mercy in a sea of devastation. But Nathaniel is already laying the groundwork to sue for full custody, claiming you are emotionally unstable and financially incapable of caring for a child. The cruelty was breathtaking. He wouldn't help her, but he would use her desperation against her to steal her son. With the small amount of premarital money she had left in a personal account, she rented a small, one-bedroom apartment in a dreary part of Brooklyn, a world away from the gleaming spires of Manhattan. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and street food. Sirens at night replaced the soft hum of the penthouse's climate control. It was a humiliating and terrifying freefall. She sold her jewelry piece by piece. The diamond studs Nathaniel had given her for their first anniversary paid 3 months' rent. Her grandmother's pearl necklace covered her initial prenatal doctor visits. Each transaction felt like she was selling a piece of her past, of herself. One rainy afternoon, heavily pregnant and emotionally drained, she stood in a crowded bodega with her items on the conveyor belt. A carton of milk, a loaf of bread, some eggs, prenatal vitamins. The total came to $27. She swiped her debit card. Declined. A heat of shame crept up her neck. She tried again. Declined. The account was empty. She had miscalculated. "Ma'am?" the cashier asked, his voice edged with impatience. The people in line behind her started to mutter. Arabella's eyes filled with tears. She fumbled in her purse, hands trembling, searching for a few loose bills she knew weren't there. She was forced to leave the groceries on the counter, mumbling an apology as she fled the store. the sympathetic and critical stares of strangers burning her back. She walked for blocks in the rain, uncaring that she was soaked to the bone. The feeling of utter, complete humiliation was a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She was about to bring a child into this world, and she couldn't even afford to buy milk. That night, she sat in the darkness of her tiny, unfamiliar apartment. The city sounds were an oppressive roar. The eviction notice for the penthouse had arrived that morning, a cold, official document marking the definitive end of her old life. She was utterly alone, stripped of her identity, her security, and her dignity. She had hit rock bottom. The fall was complete. She held her belly, the baby's soft kicks a reminder of the one thing Nathaniel couldn't take from her. It was all she had left. As despair threatened to swallow her whole, she made a silent promise to the son she had not yet met. "I won't let him break us. I will find a way." But as she looked out the window at the rain, for the first time in her life, she had no idea how. Interaction break. Arabella is facing eviction and financial ruin. She made a promise to her son. What is the one quality she needs to rely on now? Her intelligence, her pride, or her desperation? Cast your vote in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Part 4. A pact with the enemy. Setting: Arabella's Brooklyn apartment. 3 weeks later. 3 weeks before her due date, the final eviction notice arrived. It was a stark warning, red letters taped to her apartment door, a public declaration of her failure. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She had nowhere to go. Her remaining funds were nearly depleted, and the prospect of finding a new apartment in her condition, with no income and no references, was impossible. She spent the morning on the phone calling shelters, her voice thick with shame. All were full. As she sat on her worn sofa, the terrifying reality of giving birth on the streets looming over her, there was a sharp knock at the door. Her heart leaped, assuming it was the landlord or a city marshal. She ignored it, hoping they would leave. The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. With a deep sigh, she heavily rose and dragged herself to the door, looking through the peephole. A man in an impeccably tailored dark suit stood in the dismal hallway. For a moment, she didn't recognize him. Then, her blood ran cold. It was Gideon Stone. Her mind raced. What was he doing here? How had he found her? Was this some new, cruel game by Nathaniel, sending his arch-rival to gloat in her ruin? Her protective instincts flared, and she unlatched the lock, opening the door only a few inches. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Gideon Stone's intense, analytical eyes took in her appearance, her worn maternity dress, the fear in her expression, the dilapidated apartment visible behind her. He didn't sneer. He didn't smile. His face was a stoic mask. "Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice a low baritone. "My name is Gideon Stone. May I speak with you?" "It's Vance," she corrected him sharply. "And I have nothing to say to you. You're a friend of my husband's." "Ex-husband," he clarified. A subtle but significant distinction. "And Nathaniel Thorne and I are not, nor have we ever been friends. Quite the opposite." He paused. "I'm here because of your father, Roberto Vance." The mention of her father, dead 3 years, was a shock that momentarily disarmed her. "He was my mentor," Gideon said simply. "When I was 19 and had nothing but a half-baked business plan for a software company, he saw something in me. He gave me a small seed investment, not from his company, but from his own pocket. He made me promise never to mention it, to build my own name. That investment was the foundation of everything I have today. I owe him a debt I can never truly repay." Arabella stared at him, speechless. Her father had a gift for finding and nurturing young talent, but he had never mentioned Gideon Stone. This man, this feared corporate titan, was a product of her father's quiet generosity. "I've been tracking what Nathaniel has done to you," Gideon continued, his gaze unwavering. "What he is doing is not just immoral. It is a desecration of your father's legacy. Roberto Vance built his company on integrity. Nathaniel is destroying it with greed, and he is trying to destroy your son." "Why are you here?" she asked again, her voice softer this time. "I'm here to offer you a proposition," he said. "I want to help you, not out of pity, but out of a sense of honor toward the man who helped me. I know you face eviction. I know your funds are depleted. I know Nathaniel plans to sue you for custody the moment the child is born." Arabella leaned against the doorframe, the weight of her pregnancy suddenly immense. "What kind of proposition?" "I own a secluded property outside the city, fully equipped and secure. Vance Manor. You can live there for as long as you need. You will have the best medical care, financial stability, everything you and your son require. You will lack for nothing." The offer was so astounding, so far outside the realm of possibility, that it sounded like a trap. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her suspicion returning. No one does something like this for free. Gideon's expression remained unreadable. Nathaniel's greatest weakness has always been his pride. He sees his son not as a human being, but as an asset, a continuation of his dynasty. He discarded his child for a business deal, but the moment that child is born, his ego will demand to possess him. He will try to take him from you. He took a step closer, his presence filling the narrow doorway. "My proposition is this. I will give you every resource you need to protect your son. In exchange, you allow me to help raise him. Let me provide the security and future his biological father has stolen. Let me be a bulwark between your family and Nathaniel Thorne." "You want to raise my son?" she stammered, horrified and confused. "I want to protect him," Gideon corrected. "And in doing so, I want to ensure that Nathaniel Thorne can never claim the legacy of the man he betrayed. Roberto Vance's grandson will not be raised by a man like that. I won't allow it." It was a strange, almost feudal pact, a deal born of honor, vengeance, and the ghost of a man they had both admired. Arabella looked at this powerful, enigmatic man and saw not a threat, but a potential lifeline. He was offering her and her unborn child sanctuary. The alternative was the street. She thought of the cold humiliation at the grocery store, the condemning red letters of the eviction notice, and Nathaniel's chilling words in the nursery. She had promised her son she would find a way. Perhaps this was it. A dangerous, unorthodox, and desperate way. "There will be conditions," she said, testing him, her mind slowly starting to work again. "My son will carry my surname, Vance, and I will be his mother, his sole parent. You are a guardian, a benefactor, nothing more." Gideon nodded, accepting her terms without hesitation. "Of course, he is your son. I merely offer my protection." Arabella took a deep, shuddering breath. She was making a deal with her husband's greatest enemy, entrusting her future and her son's future to a man she barely knew. It was a leap of faith into a dark chasm, but it was better than the certain ruin that awaited. "All right, Mr. Stone," she said, meeting his intense gaze. "We have a deal. Arabella has accepted the most shocking alliance imaginable. Can she really trust Gideon Stone, her husband's ruthless rival? Like this video, subscribe for the next part, and leave your comments on whether this is the start of a new love story or a deadly pact. The Cost of the Crown, a mother's vengeance forged in Verkentine. Part 5. The Fortress of Vance Manor. Setting, upstate New York, immediately following. The property, now christened Vance Manor by Gideon, was less a house and more a kingdom carved into the lush, rolling hills of upstate New York. A long, winding drive flanked by ancient oaks led to a majestic gray stone mansion overlooking a private lake. It was a fortress of tranquility and wealth, a world away from the grime and desperation of Arabella's Brooklyn apartment. Gideon Stone proved true to his word. He was a discreet, respectful presence. He settled Arabella, 28, into a beautiful suite of rooms overlooking the gardens, arranged for a team of top prenatal doctors to make house calls, and ensured she had everything she could possibly need. His staff was professional and kind, led by a warm but no-nonsense housekeeper named Mrs. Reynolds. For the first time in months, Arabella could breathe. She was safe. Gideon mostly worked from a large book-lined study downstairs, and their interactions were initially formal. They occasionally shared a quiet dinner, during which he would tell her stories about her father, Roberto Vance. Tales of his business acumen, his surprising humor, and his unwavering faith in people. Through Gideon, Arabella felt a connection to the father she desperately missed, and she began to see the man behind the ruthless corporate reputation. She saw a man of deep loyalty, driven by a personal code of honor. As her due date approached, a strange, quiet camaraderie grew between them. He would find her in the library and wordlessly hand her a mug of decaf tea. She would leave the business section of the newspaper on his desk, open to an article she thought he'd find interesting. They rarely spoke of Nathaniel Thorne, but his presence remained like a poison in the air, the unspoken reason for their bizarre alliance. The night she went into labor, a fierce thunderstorm raged outside, mirroring the beautiful chaos of birth. It was Gideon who found her breathing through a contraction in the hallway. His composure was absolute. He helped her into the waiting car and talked to her in a calm, firm voice during the drive to a private hospital wing he had reserved. He never left the waiting room. Elias Vance was born just as the sun began to rise. The storm had passed. He was small and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his mother's deep blue eyes. When the nurse brought him to Arabella, her heart swelled with a love so fierce and all-consuming that it eclipsed all the pain and betrayal of the past year. He was hers. He was her reason for everything. Later that day, she allowed Gideon to see him. He stood in the doorway of the hospital room, looking hesitant for the first time since they had met. A titan of industry, humbled by the sight of a small, sleeping infant. "Come in, Gideon," she said softly. He approached the bassinet slowly, his gaze fixed on the baby. He looked at Elias, and his severe features softened into an expression of awe and something more, something akin to reverence. "He looks like you," Gideon said, his voice quiet. "He has my eyes," Arabella agreed. "But that little scowl is all his." Gideon reached out a single finger and gently touched the baby's cheek. Elias stirred, but didn't wake. In that small, silent gesture, Arabella saw the truth of his promise. This wasn't just revenge against Nathaniel or a debt to her father. This powerful, solitary man was captivated. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Nathaniel Thorne and Serafina Sterling were on the cover of Vogue, showcasing their wedding, hailed as the social event of the year. The article mentioned their plans for the future, for the Thorne-Sterling dynasty. There was no mention of a child. Nathaniel learned of the birth through a private investigator he had hired to follow Arabella. The news landed with a thump in his chest. A son. He had a son. He saw the grainy photos the investigator had taken from a distance. Arabella leaving the hospital, looking tired but radiant. And Gideon Stone, his sworn enemy, carrying the baby car seat with an air of possession. A black, possessive rage filled him. Stone was meddling in his affairs, touching what was his. "What is it, darling?" Serafina asked, drifting into his study, dripping in jewels from a party they were about to attend. "Nothing," Nathaniel snapped, slamming his laptop shut. "Just a business annoyance." But it wasn't just an annoyance. It was the seed of an obsession. The son he had ordered to be erased was now alive, well, and under the protection of his biggest rival. Elias Vance's existence was a loose end in the perfect tapestry of his new life, and Nathaniel Thorne did not tolerate loose ends. For now, he would ignore it, consolidate his power, and enjoy his victory. But he knew with a chilling certainty that one day he would come to collect his asset. Interaction break. Nathaniel is consumed by rage and jealousy. Now that he knows Elias is being raised by Gideon, do you think his next move will be a direct attack or a long-term, calculated strategy? Comment your prediction below. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. Part 6. The Unbreakable Bond. Setting: Vance Manor. 6 years later. The next 6 years passed in an idyllic stillness that felt both precious and precarious. Vance Manor became a sanctuary, a world unto itself, where Elias Vance could grow up protected from the identity of his biological father. For Elias, home was the sprawling property with its secret gardens and shimmering lake. Family was his mother, Arabella, and the tall, quiet man he called Papa, Gideon, who over time became his father in every way that mattered. Gideon's transformation was subtle but profound. The cold, calculating businessman was still there, running his global empire from his office with ruthless efficiency. But the moment he left that room, he was Elias's father in every meaningful sense. He taught the boy to skip stones on the lake, their shared laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air. He sat on a tiny chair at a makeshift table for imaginary tea parties, his large frame comically out of place, a serious expression on his face as he inquired about the health of Elias's teddy bear, Sir Reginald. He read bedtime stories, his deep baritone giving voice to dragons and knights, his finger tracing the words for the small boy cuddled beside him. He never overstepped, always deferring to Arabella on major parenting decisions, but his devotion was absolute. He was the firm, unshakable rock against which their little family was built. Arabella, 34, also flourished. With Gideon's encouragement and financial backing, she returned to her first love: landscape architecture. She started a small boutique firm, working from a design studio Gideon had built for her in one of the manor's old carriage houses. Her talent, once a mere hobby, blossomed into a successful business. She reclaimed her independence and her identity, not as the discarded wife of Nathaniel Thorne, but as Arabella Vance, a respected designer and a loving mother. The quiet bond between her and Gideon deepened into a profound, trusting friendship, a true partnership. The question of romance never arose. Their shared purpose, Elias, was too sacred to complicate. In New York, Nathaniel Thorne's life, 40, was a mirror image of theirs. Outwardly perfect, inwardly hollow. The merger with Sterling Telecom had made him spectacularly wealthy and powerful, a king in the concrete jungle. He and Serafina were regular fixtures on the social scene, their lives a glittering performance of marital bliss. But behind the closed doors of their minimalist penthouse, the silence was deafening. Their marriage was a business contract, and it had one obvious, unfulfilled clause: an heir. After years of trying, of invasive treatments and silent disappointment, their doctors delivered the final verdict. Serafina was unable to conceive. The news shattered the fragile truce of their relationship, exposing its transactional core. Mr. Sterling began looking at his son-in-law with unconcealed disappointment. A dynasty required a successor. It was then that Nathaniel's thoughts began to drift, to fixate on the son he had discarded. The loose end was now a 6-year-old boy. His obsession started small. He paid his private investigator exorbitant money for updates. First came the reports, then the photographs. He would stare at them for hours in the early morning, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. There was Elias on a pony, Gideon guiding him, a rare, genuine smile on the man's face. There was Elias at a school play, dressed as a tree, with Gideon and Arabella sitting in the front row, looking, in every sense, like a proud, normal family. And in every photo, he saw a ghost of himself. The shape of the boy's jawline, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. This was his son, his blood, his legacy. And Gideon Stone was raising him. The thought was a vile poison, twisting his pride into a knot of jealous fury. Stone hadn't just beaten him in business. He had stolen his son, his very immortality. The breaking point arrived on Gideon's birthday. Serafina hosted a lavish party, a room full of people who admired his wealth but knew nothing of the man. As toasts were made to his success, he saw a new photo on his secure phone. It was of Elias, a gap-toothed grin on his face, holding a homemade birthday card. The private investigator's caption read, "Subject celebrating Gideon Stone's birthday." His son was calling his enemy Papa. The illusion of his perfect life crumbled into dust. The wealth, the power, the beautiful wife, all were meaningless. He no longer wanted a dynasty. He wanted his son. The boy was no longer a complication to be erased or an asset to be possessed. In Nathaniel's twisted mind, Elias had become the prize in the final competition against Gideon Stone. And Nathaniel Thorne never, ever lost. He picked up the phone and dialed the number of the state's most ruthless family attorney. "My name is Nathaniel Thorne," he said, his voice cold and clear. "I want to obtain custody of my son." Nathaniel is finally making his move after 6 years. He wants to claim Elias and destroy Gideon. Do you think he has any legal chance of winning, given that he abandoned Elias and Gideon has raised him? Leave your opinion and legal predictions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. The Cost of the Crown, A Mother's Vengeance Forged in Fischkanter. Part 7. The Legal Battlefield. Setting: New York City. 6 years later. The legal documents arrived on a crisp October morning, delivered by a stone-faced messenger. The sheer thickness of the file was an act of intimidation in itself. Arabella Vance's hands trembled as she read the petition. Nathaniel Thorne versus Arabella Vance for full legal and physical custody of Elias Vance. The petition was a work of fiction, a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted her as an unstable fortune hunter who had fallen into the clutches of Gideon Stone, a man of dubious character who had insidiously alienated the child from his natural father. It portrayed Nathaniel Thorne as the grieving father who, after a period of emotional turmoil following his acrimonious divorce, was now financially and emotionally prepared to provide his son with the stable, loving home he deserved. It was filled with lies, half-truths, and cruel inversions of reality. Gideon read it over her shoulder, his face hardening like granite. "He's not just coming for Elias," he said, his voice a low growl. "He's coming for everything. He wants to destroy us." The battle that followed was brutal and public. Nathaniel used the media as his personal weapon, leaking sanitized versions of his court filings to society columnists. Headlines screamed in the tabloids. "Thorne Titan fights to reclaim son from billionaire rival." Arabella and Gideon were portrayed as the villains in his carefully crafted narrative. Nathaniel's lawyers were relentless. They subpoenaed Arabella's financial records, her therapy notes following the divorce, and her business contracts. They interrogated Mrs. Reynolds and other staff members, trying to twist their loyalty into evidence of a conspiracy. They argued that Vance Manor was not a home, but a gilded prison, and that Gideon's presence was detrimental to the child's development. The day Arabella had to give her deposition was one of the worst of her life. For 6 hours, Nathaniel's lead attorney, a shark in a $1,000 suit named Ms. Romero, dissected her life, her choices, and her very worth as a mother. "Ms. Vance," Romero began, her voice dripping with condescension, "is it not true that you were penniless and facing eviction when you accepted Mr. Stone's generous offer?" "I was in a difficult situation because my ex-husband illegally cut off my access to all marital assets," Arabella countered, her voice firm despite the furious pounding of her heart. "So you entered into a financial arrangement with your ex-husband's known business enemy, an arrangement that provided you with a life of luxury in exchange for what exactly? Your son's affection?" The cruelty of the question hit her with physical force, but she met the lawyer's gaze. "My son is not a commodity. That is a concept you should discuss with your client." Gideon, meanwhile, was fighting a war on a different front. He used his own formidable resources not to attack, but to defend. His legal team was a silent army of the best minds in the country. They built a fortress of evidence documenting Elias's happy, stable, and richly satisfying life. They had photos, videos, school reports, and testimonials from teachers, doctors, and friends, all painting a picture of a beloved, thriving child. Interaction break. The battle is heating up. Nathaniel's team is trying to prove Gideon bought Elias. What unexpected piece of evidence do you think Gideon's team will use to expose Nathaniel's true motives? Comment your brilliant strategy below. Part 8. The Judgment and the Fall. Setting: closed-door custody hearing. The climax came in the quiet, sterile, wood-paneled room of a closed-door custody hearing. Nathaniel was there, looking powerful and confident in a dark suit. Serafina, a silent, anxious statue, stood by his side. He took the stand and offered an impeccable performance, speaking of his deep regret and his profound, enduring love for the son he had never known. Then it was Gideon's turn to be cross-examined. Ms. Romero circled him like a predator. "Mr. Stone, you are not this child's father. You have no biological claim, no legal right. What exactly are you to Elias Vance?" Gideon did not look at the lawyer, but at the judge. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet and clear, devoid of the anger they tried to provoke. "I am the man who holds his hand when he's afraid of the dark. I am the one who cheers the loudest at his soccer games. I am the one who explains why the sky is blue and who listens to his jokes, even when I know the punchline." He paused. "You are correct. I have no biological claim. My claim is written in 6 years of bedtime stories, bandaged knees, and unconditional love. I am his father in every way that matters. I am his papa." The final blow, however, came from an unexpected source. Gideon's lawyers called Serafina Sterling Thorne to the stand. Nathaniel's team protested furiously, but the judge allowed it. Serafina was pale, her composure fragile. Gideon's attorney, a quiet, methodical man, approached her gently. "Mrs. Thorne, in your petition, your husband states his desire to provide a stable, 2-parent home for his son. Do you share this desire?" Serafina hesitated, her eyes darting toward Nathaniel, who shot her a look of pure menace. She took a shaky breath. "Yes," she whispered. "And do you believe you can provide that stability, given the circumstances of your marriage?" "Yes." The lawyer paused. Then he placed a file on the witness stand. "Then can you explain to the court the documents I have before me, signed by you and your husband, contracting one of the nation's top surrogacy agencies, dated 1 week after you learned Mr. Thorne had a biological son?" The room went silent. Nathaniel stiffened. "Your Honor," the lawyer continued, "Mr. Thorne has not been seeking a son. He has been seeking an heir. When it became clear his wife could not provide one, he turned to the son he had previously discarded as a loose end. He paused. This is not about love. It is about acquisition. Serafina stared at the documents, then at her husband, and something within her broke. The years of emotional neglect, of being a pawn in his dynastic ambitions, all came to a head. He told me, she said, her voice trembling but finding a new strength. He said the child was a mistake. He said Arabella was unfit. When he found out he was under Gideon's protection, he became obsessed. He said it was the final piece of his collection, that he would own everything Gideon Stone ever wanted. It was over. The lie was exposed. Nathaniel's carefully constructed narrative of the remorseful father lay in ruins, revealing the cold, grasping ambition beneath. The judge's ruling was swift and devastating, granting Arabella full custody and issuing a permanent restraining order against Nathaniel. His visitation rights were suspended indefinitely. He had lost. Stepping out of the courthouse, blinking in the sudden sunlight, Arabella saw Nathaniel standing next to his car. He looked diminished, his power stripped away, leaving only the hollow shell of a man. Their eyes met for a moment, and she felt nothing. No hatred, no anger, not even pity. He was simply a stranger, a ghost of a life that was no longer hers. Gideon put a protective arm around her shoulder, and they walked away, leaving Nathaniel with the ruin of his own making. The epilogue, a family of choice. Later that night, back at Vance Manor, they tucked Elias, 6, into bed. "Papa," Elias murmured sleepily, "did you win your big meeting today?" Gideon smoothed Elias's hair from his forehead. "Yes, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We won." He and Arabella stood in the hallway for a moment, the quiet peace of the house settling around them. She reached out and took his hand. It was not a gesture of romance, but of something deeper, a partnership, a gratitude, and an unshakable, shared bond. They had faced the storm together and had emerged into the calm. They were a family, not of blood, but of choice. And in the quiet fortress of Vance Manor, they were finally, truly, home. A message of value, the true legacy. The story of Arabella and Gideon reminds us that true family is forged not by DNA, but by dedication, sacrifice, and showing up every single day. Nathaniel Thorne learned the hardest lesson of all, that a child is not a possession to be claimed, and that a family cannot be acquired through a hostile takeover. Arabella, Gideon, and Elias proved that the truest bonds are forged by choice, by weathering the storm, and by teaching a child the profound, unconditional love that money and power can never buy. Thank you for listening. What did you think of the ending? Please like this video. Share it with someone who loves a story of resilience and unexpected love. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat.